Human rights is the soul of our foreign policy because human rights is the very soul of our sense of nationhood. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today is foreign policy and the US-backed resolution which was co-sponsored by Sri Lanka. Where does the country stand today? On the 14th of June, that is a few days from now, Prince Zaid Al Hussein, the Human Rights Commissioner of the United Nations, is to address the 32nd session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva and is to make special mention about the country, about our island nation. On the 29th of June, Mangala Samaraweera, the Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka, is to give an oral update on the implementation of the US-backed resolution again co-sponsored by Sri Lanka. Where are we standing right now? Do we have a foreign policy? What are we really doing right now? Good governance in place? Human rights? A big question mark in your minds? Let's talk about all this and more with our four eminent panelists today. Let me introduce Dr. Pakistan Saranmuthu, Executive Director of the Center for Policy Alternatives. Nice to have you on board, Dr. Saranmuthu, as usual. Also joining us this evening is Dr. Pratibha Mahanameheva, former Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. He was one of the commissioners of the Human Rights Commission of the country during the previous regime. Also joining us this evening is Mr. Gomin Dayasri, Senior Attorney at Law. Thank you very much, Mr. Dayasri, for joining us this evening on the show. Also joining us this evening is Mr. Gehan Gunatilaka, Research Director of Veta Research. He's also an attorney at law. Nice to have you on board, Gehan. Let's start off our session with Mr. Gomin Dayasri, Senior Attorney at Law. There seems to be no consistency with economic policy at the moment, Mr. Dayasri. Do we have consistency as far as foreign policy is concerned? Can we expect that from the present regime? Your time starts now.
Yes. I can certainly say that there is no central or a united or a uniform foreign policy. There is a policy of shooting from your hip as far as three people are concerned. There are three chief characters I see in this game plan. One is the foreign minister, other is the president, and the third is the prime minister. Now all three are characters who should be making a joint contribution with a Sri Lankan standpoint. But instead, we've seen a position where, if you look at it historically, if you look at the situation after this government came into play, in the first session, I think a very enlightened opening was made by the ambassador there. But he was shut down, he was blamed, he was faulted in the press, and it was reported that he has been taken to task by the government. Now that's indeed strange because his brief should have come from the foreign ministry. And if he did deviate from it, then he would have been in trouble and he certainly wouldn't be a high official there speaking for himself. What happened next? We had the resolution. Now it was touted as a US resolution, but finally it became a Sri Lanka US resolution, and undoubtedly, since the subject matter is Sri Lanka, it's a Sri Lankan resolution. Now we can't get behind that. Then what happened? What did the local characters say? The president straight away said that there will be no foreign judges. And he has proved to be correct. And why did he say that? Why did he take a stand inconsistent with the US resolution? Now you're getting into serious trouble there if you do that. And he did it straight away because he has his ear to the ground. He has the ear to the electorate. He knows what the people's requests are and he knows what the forces feel about it. He didn't want to antagonize anyone. The Prime Minister, as usual, took the traditional UNP line, that is, being bowing and acknowledging the presence of the US. I mean, it was, but that's a very important matter to look into because US can or may not help us economically. Now that is the more important issue. Straight away we see the IMF being given a warning by the new likely president of US, Hillary Clinton, during her period, where she has blamed them for helping Sri Lanka. Now we have then the Mangala Samaraweera, who is completely on a trip of his own and he probably was influential in getting the resolution through. But now what has happened? The Prime Minister has acknowledged the fact that the Sri Lankan laws have been followed, and the Sri Lankan laws does not permit foreign judges participating. So it's going to be no foreign judges. Now how will the UN look at it? Is this an agenda they are going to throw overboard, or are they going to take it seriously and punish Sri Lanka? Now what I fear mostly is the punishment is going to be economic. Now that's where the real crisis will blow up for the government, and I think even at this stage the President should get involved in the act, because he seems to know the feeling, the gut feeling of the people of Sri Lanka, and you can well see that the Prime Minister is accepting that position, and I don't think the Foreign Minister will have any other
let me interrupt you for a second here. You said that there are three characters involved, the Foreign Minister, the President and the Prime Minister. Who is making decisions?
Each is making a decision of his own and then formulating it and presenting it. But finally, we can only take one position. That is the position which is consistent with the laws of Sri Lanka. And that to me seems to be the position that the President has been taking. No foreign judges.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dashri, for your thoughts. Senior Attorney at Law, Mr. Gumin Dashri, thank you very much for joining us this evening as well, Mr. Dashri. I move my attention now to Gihan Gunathilaka, Research Director of Veta Research, Attorney at Law as well. In 2015, Gihan, it seemed like the right thing to do to co-sponsor the US-backed resolution. But now it seems somewhat was the wrong decision. Is it so?
Absolutely not. First of all, just to respond to Mr. Dayasri's statement, I think it's absurd to think that the Foreign Minister would advance a particular text of a resolution before a multilateral organization.
What happened if that's the case?
Without consulting the Prime Minister and President. I mean, it's unthinkable. And it's quite clear that there was a consensus in terms of the contents of the resolution. One only has to go and look at the parliamentary debate on the resolution. There was an absolutely clear consensus on all sides that the resolution was something that the Sri Lankan government has co-sponsored and the Sri Lankan government is willing to implement. These are the Sri Lankan government's own commitments. So now divorcing yourselves from the resolution and seeing this as a foreign policy issue that only the Foreign Minister is advancing is just a break from reality, to be honest.
But just again, just want to interrupt you for a second here before moving on to my question which I posed to you. However, we saw just months after the President coming out and saying that no foreign judges will be incorporated to the mechanism that would be introduced. Just 2 weeks prior to the Prince's visit, who is the Human Rights Commissioner to Sri Lanka as well. So it seems that the President was not really aware of the content of the resolution in question.
I disagree. I think the President was perfectly aware.
So you agree with Mr. Dashri?
No, I think the President is perfectly aware of the contents of the resolution. The interpretation of that particular clause, the participation of foreign judges, is what is now a contentious matter. Some may interpret that particular provision as meaning the direct participation of judges as judges on these courts. But an alternative interpretation, and I think this is the interpretation that the President probably advances, is that foreign judges will come on as advisors. So there is a dispute perhaps on the actual interpretation of that
I don't think you are aware that last week the Prime Minister meeting forces, the commanders of the tri-forces said that no foreign judges will be included in this mechanism in question.
That's the same, that is the identical interpretation. So this matter is something that will evolve. And I think it's important to give all
for
three...
the better or the worse?
I think for the better. And we have to hope for that. If we hope that the particular commitment is going to be watered down, then it is obviously going to be for the worse. But I believe that the commitments in the resolution are the government's own commitments. It is not the Foreign Minister's commitments. It's the Foreign Minister acting with the consensus of the Prime Minister and the President, committing to an international body. And I believe that these particular commitments have to be taken seriously. And it's not now for anyone to come and say that it's just one ministry that is advancing a particular version of the resolution.
Do you think that the Foreign Minister believes that there was war crimes in Sri Lanka?
You'll have to ask the foreign minister that. I mean, I can't speak for the foreign minister, but it is
But
very clear.
As a research director of Veto Research, I'm sure that you all do a lot of research on aspects of these sort as well. Do you think that there was war crimes in the country?
You're asking me whether there were crimes committed. Now, crimes cannot be proven until there's an investigation, a prosecution, and a conviction, right? So, I believe that there is enough material for there to be a serious, credible investigation, prosecution, and possibly convictions. But I'm not going to say that there are war crimes, because that would be prejudicing that process.
Thank you very much, Gehan, for your thoughts as well.
For a moment, please. Just 1 minute,
yes,
please. What my learned friends seem to say, there seems to be a difference between advisors and judges. I don't think a judge can be an advisor, or an advisor can be a judge. They are in total different capacities.
No, I agree completely. I agree completely, and my interpretation of the text is that they should be performing functions as judges. Of course, there could be a dispute in terms of that interpretation, and I agree with Mr. Daisik. I think that is the only interpretation that is possible. But there seems to be some disagreement on that in terms of that interpretation.
So, do you agree with Mr. Daisik, or you don't agree with Mr. Daisik?
I agree on his interpretation of the text, but I disagree that that there was no consensus.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunathilaka. I now move on to Dr. Pratibha Mahanamaheva, one of the commissioners of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka, one of the former commissioners of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. Dr. Mahanamaheva, what is your thought about the US-backed Sri Lanka co-sponsored resolution? Where are we standing right now?
First of all, I like to tell, last year October, when Foreign Minister addressed, he gave a pledge, Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Because in 2015 what happened, they postponed for 1 year. And what we have done up to now? 2015 to 2016 June, we just appoint commissions. Very recently, 24th, Cabinet approved OMP, Office of Missing Persons. There is Parnagama Commission one side. There are 11 experts appointed to investigate that US resolution. So, 3 things are there at the moment. Only one thing Sri Lanka want to show in forthcoming Geneva session, we have appointed at least OMP. Then the issue, what about this Parnagama Commission? They investigated years and years, special gazette notification given. Their power also, given in a larger way. And foreign experts are appointed to advise last regime. And now simply, Minister of Foreign Affairs making a statement, we have established Office of Missing Persons, anyone can come and give their views and look here, you can work in that. Then what about this 11 experts commission, which was set up in February to look into this US resolution?
But so that's a policy decision taken by the government.
No, this is a very complex situation, I am telling. Now, which one we accept finally?
But the government can do whatever they want.
They can do whatever they want, just to plead the UN. No, they can do anything. But what is the ground reality? I am telling this. Now, you ask, what was the stand? Last time in 2015 October, they actually proposed one international investigation. So thereafter, January 2016, President gave an interview to BBC. In that he said, President said, we are going to appoint local judges. Very recently, Prime Minister called all these forces and gave a promise once again, we are only appointing foreign judges. So there is no difference between President and Prime Minister, both coming in one line. But Foreign Minister several times gave several promises. So that is the issue. So which one we are accepting? Sometimes the Channel 4 also, now there is a rumor, I don't know true or not, yes, war crimes happened, that's why you asked earlier. So in all these things, finally, what was the end product we are giving in June? What was the end product we are going to give in October 2016? We have not appointed Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or even local judges with foreign advisors, or even national inquiry. So even this Office of Missing Persons, you say government can do anything. What is the mandate? Now how they are going to do it? It was there in South Africa, Chile, Argentina and other countries. Similarly, we are going to appoint one here. So just appointing commissions, just appointing these officers, do you think there will be any productive thing?
Thank you very much, Dr. Pratibha Mahana Meheva, one of the former commissioners of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. And now move my attention to Dr. Pakisotha Saramuthu, Executive Director of the Center for Policy Alternatives. Dr. Saramuthu, right move, wrong move, sponsoring or co-sponsoring a resolution in Geneva last year, and now are we digging our own grave?
Well, as far as co-sponsoring the resolution in Geneva is concerned, I do believe it was the right move. Everything contained in that resolution in Geneva, I think, is something that this country needs, requires for reconciliation, and reconciliation as the bedrock for a meaningful national unity. However, if there are second doubts and fears and concerns about implementing the provisions within that resolution, I think there has to be a lot of discussion and persuasion with regard to what was actually intended in that resolution in 2015. You also had the report under the aegis of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which called for a hybrid court. Let's face it, at the end of the day, with regard to accountability, if we are concerned about victims, if that court is going to be exclusively domestic, it will not be credible in their eyes. Therefore, the government really does have to sit down and think long and hard about what it wants to achieve. Reconciliation is not about ticking boxes for multilateral fora. They demonstrated a sincerity in September. The international community is behind them. The international community, I think, wants to see that the trajectory of progress is in the right direction, using that resolution as the reference point. It's not about meeting arbitrary deadlines or anything like that. But certainly, as far as the accountability mechanism is concerned, it is very important to recognize that that text, I think, is fairly unambiguous. And the government needs to make a firm decision and indeed speak with one voice in terms of what it intends to do. Now, I am on a task force for public consultations with regard to the mechanisms for reconciliation, and I have no doubt that there will be a certain section, maybe a substantial section of the public in parts of this country, particularly from victims' families, who are going to turn around and say, if at the very least, if there is no international component in that accountability mechanism, that it will lack credibility in their eyes.
Dr. Saramuthu, you said domestic mechanism not credible in their eyes. In their eyes, you refer to the international community, I believe.
No, I'm referring to the victims in particular.
Civil society, individuals like you, where do you stand? Do you think that foreign judges are needed?
I think judges are needed precisely because of that point, and I would support a hybrid court.
Where do you see Sri Lanka in the next few days, in the next few weeks, in terms of the Human Rights Commission in Geneva?
Remember, the requirements, as far as the Council is concerned, is that the High Commissioner give an oral report. The Foreign Minister will make a statement at the end of June. No doubt he will talk about the Office of Missing Persons and other measures that have been taken with regard to advancing reconciliation. The real test is going to come in March 2017, when there has to be a comprehensive report on the resolution.
The President and the Prime Minister have explicitly said already that no foreign judges will be incorporated to the mechanism that will be introduced by the country. How do you view this statement?
Well, as I've said, I prefer a hybrid court, and that's what I would support. There is a process of consultation, which they've also set in train, and I hope they will take into account, as promised, what comes out of that consultation as well. So this may not be the last word on it. I don't know.
So the US-sponsored resolution, co-sponsored by Sri Lanka, has been watered down by the co-sponsoring country,
well,
Sri
certainly,
Lanka.
if the implementation of the accountability mechanism is going to be an exclusively domestic court, it would be watering down what was intended in the resolution in September 2015.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saramuthu. I open the floor for questions from the journalists. Let me briefly introduce them to you. On to my right is Nadim Majid. On to my immediate left is, good evening, Nadim. On to my immediate left is Sonali Vanikabaduge. And also on to my far left is Charita Fernando. Charita? Let's open the floor from you.
My first question is to Dr. Pakiswati Saranmuthu. The cabinet decision to set up the Office of Missing Persons, leaving aside all the other commissions that were set up before. From what you have observed, do you think that this office has consulted victims seriously or efficiently?
Well, the consultation process by which this legislation was prepared was grossly unsatisfactory as a process goes, because it didn't go out to the country and talk to victims across the country. However, the government did make a presentation to the task force as well as to certain civil society organizations as well as victims' families as to what it intended by the Office of Missing Persons. We have received, as the task force, written submissions and online submissions which explicitly deal with the Office of Missing Persons, and we summarized those submissions and gave them to the government. We know that some of those suggestions have been taken into account. There are two particular areas which don't seem to be reflected in the document that has been, in the legislation that has been prepared, and that is with regard to the Office of Missing Persons having a prosecutorial arm, and also with the name. A lot of the victims' families make the point that it should not be called Office of Missing Persons, but they want the involuntary and enforced dimension of the missing to be in the title of the office as well.
So there are concerns that the government might be hastily trying to finalize it before the oral update in June. If that is the case, how do you think Sri Lanka will fare the next session?
Well, as far as the Office of Missing Persons is concerned, Cabinet has approved and it's being sent to Parliament. There are other mechanisms which the government promised, including what we've been talking about in terms of accountability, a special court, a special counsel's office, reparations, Truth and Justice Commission. Those have yet to be designed, and those have yet to be sent to Parliament. I hope, I trust, that those will follow very closely what comes out of the public consultations in the design of those mechanisms.
Dr. Saranmuthu, my question is also to you. The previous government was accused of militarization in the guise of economic development. However, under the present government, we see more openness, steps to let loose the stronghold, to release back the lands to civilians, also to reduce military presence. Now, this is incidentally also what the international community and the UN is calling for. But do you, in your opinion, think that this is a dangerous balance to strike, given the fact that there is national security to look out for? What's your opinion?
I don't see as to why national security concerns, as well as fundamental rights of citizens, cannot be met. For 8 years, we litigated with regard to Sampur. Finally, the people got that land back. It was initially national security. Then they said it was a special economic zone. One must really look very closely at the whole question of national security. We are in this studio today talking about foreign policy and human rights. You should also have a program which looks very closely at what constitutes national security. Whether national security constitutes military occupation of private land to have golf courses, retail trade, vegetable plots, and hotels. That surely can't be national security. There needs to be a very close, incisive look at what constitutes national security, which is compatible with taking this country to what I would say is its topmost priority, to a post-conflict situation in which all citizens, all peoples in this country feel equal.
Sorry to cut you short, Dr. Saranmuthu. Mr. Dashri, I have a question for you regarding this interpretation of the Human Rights Resolution, where Gehan also agreed with you that, you know, it is pretty unambiguous, it is pretty direct. There will be foreign judges, and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Prince Zaid Rad Al Hussein, has said as much when the resolution was being adopted as well. So there can be no room for any questions now, can there?
I think that's a very good, you have given the answer. The position is simply this. I think the last government was accused of not being sincere, honest and transparent in their dealings with the UN bodies. I think that same criticism will be made against this government also if they go and promise something and do something else. Now that is exactly what is happening here, and the question we got to examine is why is it happening? Why is it that we want to go and clash unnecessarily with foreign bodies when we should be quite clear in our positions, be quite certain what we are doing before going and making promises and passing resolutions? Now the question I think is that this is a government of two parties, of the SLFP and the UNP. And right down at the bottom, they are mindful of the fact that President Sirisena came to power because of the northern vote. They have to pacify the northern voters. They know that is also important. The bulk of the votes are in the south. So remember that President Sirisena and Prime Minister Wickremesinghe gets very substantial support from the south. They can't be deaf to the voice of the south. They have to be very conscious of the north. Now it's a very difficult task.
Should they be taking steps to change the voice of the south though?
They should endeavor to get undoubtedly some degree of unity between the south and the north. I think that's the most important thing that they should be doing, not going to having missing persons or commissions for this and that, because that one, it will please what the south may not please the north. Something it will be different as far as other matters are concerned.
Mr. Dashri, there has to be a mechanism in place.
There must be a mechanism in place, and that mechanism should be the prime mechanism as to how the reconciliation process should go through. And I think there the most important thing is the economy of the country, the state of health. And if we, at this stage, the government who should be very successful in negotiating with the West, in negotiating with the US, now is in a situation where candidates, a presidential candidate is making overtures to the IMF not to help us if we don't honor those agreements. Now the bottom line is local politics. The top line is...
It's interesting that you talk about politics, because my next question is to Gehan. Dr. Sarunmuthu said that the international community, they expect a trajectory of progress from us in moving forward in terms of implementation of the resolution. Do you think that's true, or does it appear to you that global geopolitical realities have trumped standing up for human rights?
There's no doubt that all states have agendas, and those agendas play themselves out in international fora like the UN. And it will be silly to pretend that those agendas don't exist. But let me be very clear. Engagement with the international community and in international fora is nothing new to Sri Lanka. We've been doing it for decades. We did so in the human rights context in the late 80s. We've done so not only as a country that is being scrutinized, but as a country that scrutinizes. Our own Palita Kohana participated in the scrutiny of Israel's human rights conduct, and this was during the previous regime. So we have a history of participating and engaging the international community. This should not be seen as something new and contentious. And also when it comes to participating in other jurisdictions in terms of judges, we send our judges to Fiji all the time. But the point, so this is nothing new.
The point that I want to get to is, given that now there's a regime in power that is friendly to Western nations and to Western interests, do you think it's likely that if President Sirisena says no foreign judges, that the international community will not really push on it, and that the current resolution will be relegated to the dustbin?
I think there is a risk that the hostility ending between the government and the international community transforming itself into one of such cooperation that in fact the text of the resolution is compromised on. That risk is there. But I think it is also important to understand that this resolution is not driven by the international community. It is driven by local victims and survivors and civil society that is based in Sri Lanka. So as long as the victims and survivors and civil society in Sri Lanka are unhappy with how things progress, we will always have pressure on the government.
But closure is important, Bihan, in terms of these victims, in terms of civil society. It's important in a democracy to have closure. People have to know.
What do you mean by closure? I mean,
People have
if
to
I
know
talk
where
about
where
closure,
their family is. People have to know where their missing loved ones are.
so I
Isn't that
agree with you
closure?
completely. But to do
But
that,
you can't direct the point. You can't point the finger at civil society or the victims and say it's not important unless, as long as they're unhappy, things are going to be not that great for the government.
I'm misunderstanding your question. I think I agree with you that closure is important,
Okay.
and that closure entails knowing the truth and
Absolutely.
receiving justice,
Okay.
and that is precisely why the local victims and survivors will be unhappy until that is delivered.
Are you for having foreign judges or are you against having foreign judges?
That's a good question. That's a good question. There are two reasons that we need to consider foreign judges. One, as Dr. Sarah said, victims have demanded it, and victims do not trust the local mechanisms because of a history of broken promises. The second reason is one of expertise. Do we really have the expertise to deal with some of the complex legal issues that will arise in terms of war crimes, crimes against humanity? The expertise doesn't exist currently. Now, we already send judges to Fiji in anticipation of the fact that Fiji may not have the expertise that our
Taking
judges
into
have.
context the Sri Lankan issues right now, are you for having foreign judges or are you against having foreign judges?
Absolutely for having foreign judges. There's no doubt about the fact
Doctor-
that we need foreign judges if we're serious about this particular resolution.
Dr. Mahanam, I have a question for you on the matter of the law, what the law says on this subject. The UN Human Rights Council resolution is a matter of, well, it's a cloudy matter of international law. In this case, does international law trump our domestic laws, given that we are a co-sponsor of that resolution? Does it mean that we now have to amend our laws to get in line with the resolution, or do our laws hold sway?
Now I think this is where you see international conventions. Most of these international conventions, once we ratify, it has absorbed to our law. Now this is where people think to punish. My argument, it is not to punish, not to reoccur these things once again. You have to see missing persons, what has happened. Now there are a lot of complaints. Now these complaints and LTT diaspora as well as LTT backing groups were there. So they pushed for this. That's why European Union very recently said one thing. If you need GSP plus or any other relief, definitely you have to go through this international inquiry. So we can't waive from this international inquiry, but we can push into certain things. That's why Mangala Samaravira tried, the Honorable Foreign Minister. That's why he said, rather than this hybrid court, we will appoint a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In that Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we are example from South Africa and other countries, then you can include many foreign experts also. So when you are setting a hybrid court as you ask, there are some certain legal barriers. Whether foreign judges can sit in Sri Lanka courts. So rather than it is a domestic one, I also propose one thing, national inquiry. That type of national inquiry, before going for hybrid court or before going for TRC, we can see with foreign expert. For example, Commonwealth, Human Rights Division we have, with their support, judges are there. They really support for Sri Lanka such an inquiry. And then we can extend it to a hybrid court or TRC. But we have not thought those things. Even
So
we have-
what you're saying is that we should initially have a national inquiry and then maybe extend it to a
right.
hybrid court?
That's my main argument. For that, basically Commonwealth Human Rights Division fully supporting. That's why Honorable Kamalesh Sarma, when he was there, when we at the National Human Rights Commission, we also made our best effort to start. We made a TOR. And also Sri Lanka Human Rights Commission was trained by Human Rights Division and Good Governance Office in Commonwealth. But anyway, there were some impediments, we could not start. But now it's a good opportunity.
Dr. Saramuthu, are you in agreement with Dr.
One minute.
Mahanam?
HRC officials were trained 3 times.
Seems like a good
One
idea.
in London, one in Geneva, one in Sri Lanka.
Dr. Saramuthu, seems like a good idea. First of all, have a domestic mechanism and then reach out to the international community if needed.
We have had domestic mechanisms going into double figures. We've had inquiries and investigations. The poor people, the ones you were talking about who need closure, are fed up of going before these domestic commissions. Nothing has happened. We haven't even got the reports of these commissions made public. So, why don't we think in terms of something which will be definitive, which will be the best possible mechanism that we can get? What is the priority here? Is it really the case that if we have 2 or 3 foreign judges on a court that is looking into allegations of war crimes and crimes against international humanitarian law, that our sovereignty will be fatally compromised? Really?
Mr. Dashri, why isn't the international community or the UN not having faith in the Sri Lankan judicial process? Why?
The answer to that is, if we have to go forward with the resolution or get the resolution amended. We are doing neither. We are not taking any provision, we are making no progress at all, made no attempts to get it amended. Now, without whatever Mr. Mahanama might say about conventions, in our law, as it is now reads, there must be local laws to back such commissions. The government has presented no such legislation permitting foreign judges. So, even come March, if that is not in place, well, you just cannot have foreign judges. Now, my friend Gyan also admitted that there is a difference between judges and advisors. Very simple. What we should have given a lot of thought at the time we formulated that resolution. We could have had foreign expertise in the capacity of advisors, but not as judges, because then that is consistent with the Sri Lankan laws. And mind you, it is not only the northern victims that have to be considered. There are southern victims, there are the army and the forces, there are the people of the south, the people of the north, the people of these 3 different communities. You have to satisfy them all if you are going to get this reconciliation process. I don't think any one of those things were given much thought at the time we formed the resolution.
Actually, do you think that the judiciary and our systems that we have in place are capable of handling an investigation or a prosecution process of that magnitude?
I think if you find the correct judges, you can well find them. Take for example a man like Christy Veeramantri. He is highly respected. There are many people like that who are respected here and abroad. But I don't say they should be members of the regular judiciary. They may be retired people.
The reason that I asked this question is we found out today that a former official who has been appointed as an additional secretary to a ministry now, we find that as per the establishment code, he should actually be on compulsory leave and not holding office right now. So my question is, in a country where there are such transgressions against law, can you have faith in the judiciary?
Well, it is how the judiciary performs. The judiciary performs, if they are under command performance from the executive or the legislature, then there's no independent judiciary in this country. And I'm of the view there is not a sufficiently independent judiciary in the country even at present. Leave that aside. What we should do is we should do things according to our law. And our law does not permit foreign judges. That is the point that the President has been making and making it correctly. Then we can amend the laws, or we can amend the resolution. We are doing nothing. We are just doing nothing. This is that whole trouble with the last government. They had what is called an action plan. Nothing was done about it. They were making promises to Mrs. Clinton. Mrs. Clinton was satisfied if those promises were fulfilled. Nothing was done. what is happening now? What do you see? You see some few experts being appointed. They probably may be having tea and sandwiches and some coffee.
Just 1 minute.
Nothing else is really happening on the ground.
Just 1 minute, Mr. Dayasri.
Yeah.
I just want to throw that to Dr. Saranmuthu as well. Dr. Saranmuthu, Mr. Dayasri has said that there needs to be more independence in the judiciary and that we should strengthen our local judicial system. So, which should be the priority, having a hybrid court or strengthening the local judiciary systems to be able to cope with?
I think that's a false dichotomy. If you have a hybrid court, that will invariably have a knock-on effect of strengthening the judiciary.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your thoughts in the first and second rounds. Going for a short commercial break. When we come back, we'll discuss more on foreign policy and the US-backed resolution, which was co-sponsored by Sri Lanka in the year 2015. All this and more after the short commercial break. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. Let's start off the third round with Dr. Pakis Saramuthu, Executive Director of the Center for Policy Alternatives. Dr. Saramuthu, a task force on public consultation was established. Have you all met the victims, the people who are concerned about the issues that are surrounding this country?
Yes, we have. It's a task force of 11 people drawn from civil society. And the task force has 2 advisory panels. One is a panel of experts of people who worked on transitional justice. The other is a representatives panel to ensure that there is broadest possible inclusion amongst the stakeholders around the country. We are going to be commencing community-level consultations by the middle of this month. And then you will have...
Middle of next month, you mean June?
June, sorry, yes, June. We've already got submissions that have been made to us online and sent by post, and indeed some of those submissions directly related to the Office of Missing Persons, and we've summarized those submissions and given them to the government. So we hope and we strongly encourage everyone to come forward. As Mr. Dayasri said, I mean, it's all communities. This is not about people
How
in
long
one
will
part
this
of the
process
country
take,
as opposed
Dr.
to another.
Saramuthu? How long
Sorry?
will this process take?
Well, we hope that the process can be concluded within a period of 4 to 6 weeks, but it depends entirely on the number of people who come forward with submissions. We can't turn people away.
Will the consultations be made public?
Yes, the consultations will be public. The report at the end of the consultations will be made public as well.
You're sure that this process, the public task force on public consultation, is not just ticking a box in a few items that the government has to fulfill?
Well, what I'm sure of is this, is that the task force will do what it can and can do best in ensuring that it's not just ticking a box. And that after that report is handed over to the government and made public, it will be up to civil society to ensure that the design and mechanisms for whatever, whether it be truth, justice, accountability, etc., do reflect what has come out of public consultations. And if the government hasn't taken them on board, that the government does explain as to why it chose to do A as opposed to B.
How does the task force intend to deal with the threats, harassment of individuals who come on board and testify?
As soon as the task force was formed, one of the first things that it did, indeed the first thing that it did, was to meet with the force commanders in a meeting chaired by the Defense Secretary, where this concern was laid very, very candidly and very honestly in front of them, that this was something that the government of Sri Lanka was engaging in. It was up to the armed forces to help to ensure that there is an enabling environment for this to happen. Then when the website of the task force was launched in Jaffna, we met with the force commanders up there as well. The security forces have identified a point person. We've asked them to send out, to communicate to their rank and file what exactly has to be done. And so we are reasonably assured at this point that they are on board. But of course, the proof of the pudding, as it were, is going to be seen when the consultations actually begin.
Dr. Saramuthu, when I spoke about threats, why did you say that you met the security forces commanders? What's the thinking behind it?
Because the concern from people, particularly in the north and east, was that that was where the threats were coming from members of the security forces. And threats in terms of this, not just threats, it was about intimidation, it was about surveillance. In October of last year, for example, when we had a meeting at which the foreign minister spoke about Geneva, people who travelled from the north and east were questioned. So it's precisely that kind of thing which could act as a deterrent and inhibiting factor against people coming forward that we want to ensure does not take place again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pakisa Saramuthu, Executive Director of the Center for Policy Alternatives. I now move my attention to Mr. Govind Dayasri, Senior Attorney at Law. Mr. Dayasri, interestingly, you said that based on the country's law, you cannot appoint foreign judges. Who at the Foreign Ministry does not understand English and interpret English?
The Foreign Ministry does not understand very many things more than English. They don't understand, I don't know their knowledge, working knowledge of English, but I certainly know that they know very little about foreign affairs. Because for this reason, Shamil, look, we got to know what our priorities are. Our priority one should be national reconciliation. Now, I think it's a very good thing to ask what the people have to say about it. And we have a listening post. This time, Mr. Saranamuthu, all good luck to him. He's going around asking people questions. This is not the first time it has happened. We had the LLRC, they were going all over the countryside, very eminent people.
But never implemented, Mr. Ashri.
Sorry?
Never implemented. The recommendations were never implemented.
That is what I'm saying. They've got all the reports, and everybody said to begin with, the LLRC is a whitewashing committee. Then their report came and everybody started praising it. They said there's value to it. And what happened? So many months they went through this listening period, the listening post. Let's hope this time it doesn't happen. It happens every time. You have a lot of people travel around the country, get ideas, produce useful reports. Government doesn't implement it. Now that is where the problem is. There are good reports, consultations, adequate or inadequate, but the report finally is not put into operation. What we need first is, before everything else, forget about everything, get national reconciliation on board. That is the prime cause. That means you have to get the three main communities, the country, the south, the north, the east and the west. Everybody must. Then only should you go out to the foreign countries, enter into resolutions. But we put all that behind and went first and entered into a resolution, which is very difficult to implement. My issue is, whatever consultations you have, remember the LLRC was even more eminent than the present committee. You had the Attorney General, former Attorney General, the former Foreign Minister, very eminent people. And they did ask very relevant questions, and mind you, the commission that was mocked was subsequently praised even by Mrs. Clinton. What did we do? Now what have we done so far? Even this useful report that Mr. Saranamuthu may be releasing, maybe how much of it is going to be implemented, because we very clearly see the very resolution that we have cannot be implemented because of the question you asked.
So
we
you
have
to say
be
that
consistent with the laws of Sri Lanka.
So you mean to say that the government is trying to deceive the international community yet again?
To me it looks like, and will be punished severely this time. Last time we were punished, and this time it may be even more severe because we have promised too much and we are not even doing anything. We could have, if we were serious about the judges, you have this difference between judges and experts. If we needed experts, we could have got experts, judges to come as experts, as advisors, but we said foreign judges. If that is so, why don't we bring laws to be consistent with that? Nothing, no efforts done. I think the committees that are going into these matters should look into this aspect. Are we serious about this resolution, or are we trying to hoodwink the international community and win the voters in Colombo, in Sri Lanka? That to me is the prime concern of this government also.
Thank you very much, Mr. Govind Dayasri. I now move my attention to Dr. Pratibha Mahana-Maheva, one of the former commissioners of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. Dr. Mahana-Maheva, I want to quip a quote from the former High Commissioner of the present High Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission. He made a statement early this year. He said that Sri Lanka has many excellent judges, lawyers and law enforcement officials, but over the years the system they depend on and which depends on them became highly politicized, unbalanced and unreliable. The country's history over the past few decades is littered with judicial failures. Virtually all Sri Lankans recognize this. Taking into account the statement made by the Commission of Human Rights, Prince Zaid Ral Al Hussein, domestic mechanism, is it the way to go about? Is this what the international community want? Or is it what the people of Sri Lanka want?
I think Prince Zaid Al Hussein's statement, it's a statement he made looking the facts that he poses with. So therefore, totally I am not going to critically analyze this statement. I don't have much time. But
you have
I
2
don't,
minutes and 46 seconds. That's
yeah,
enough for you?
No, I am not fully agreed for that. Because I can say some cases may have happened, but there can be some other cases also. I'll prove it. Hague, ICC. How many Sri Lankans work as prosecutor's office? How many judges were there? In internationally, Sri Lankan judges were accepted. This is where ICC office in Hague, Netherlands. Former Yugoslavia case, and also several cases are there. Attorney General Department, several senior officers, they were released for prosecute those cases. So, trusted people are there. That's why I tell you. If people really accept this special task force, as Dr. Saranamuthu said, people accepting us, people ready to say all these complaints. So why can't those people accept our judges also? But I am not totally, in principle I am agreed for hybrid court. In principle I agree. But the issue, we can't establish with this legal framework. That's why my main argument, always I am telling, we can have an inquiry as Paranagama Commission. Now Paranagama Commission, how many years they worked? They also went to all rural areas in Jaffna and other places. So they also have complaints. And they also have made reports. Some of the reports were submitted to Geneva. And this task force also making lot of reports. So finally these are only reports. LLRC, you can't say all the recommendations not implemented. There are recommendations which were implemented. Internally displaced person, removing bombs, claymore bombs. Likewise, there are several. Some were not implemented. Now, if
the most important ones were not implemented.
Yeah, there were some this inquiry, and also in human rights, certain. There was one PTA.
Ensuring that the people, internally displaced people, are resettled is the responsibility of a particular government. Removing clay mines is a responsibility of a particular government.
But those were there in the LLRC also. Those were there in the LLRC.
Those are responsibilities of a particular government, Dr. Mahana Mehra.
Yes, but other organizations also supported. I am totally agree with you. I have no argument with that. But there were several, another high court was set up in Anuradhapura to expedite all these LTD cases. Now, last Supreme Court judgment where I like to mention, national security extend to 11 areas. When the Supreme Court determination came up, freedom from information bill. In that case, if you really find out, national security means economic, tourism. So it has been extended to other areas also. Land, which is there in the last case. So it's a new interpretation where what is national security. My main argument is this. We have lot of commissions. And see, this UPR also come in 2017. Universal Periodical Report. 101 recommendations we accepted to implement. We have not done those things. So what to please international community, we are setting up several things.
Dr.
And also we are trying to postpone this time to time.
Dr. Mahana, very quickly before we move on to Gyan Gunatulaka, you are a lawyer by profession. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is it right?
Yeah.
Are you a lawyer by profession? Yes. You said that you don't agree with the Prince's statement about the judicial system being politicized in Sri Lanka. As a lawyer, do you think Sri Lanka's judicial system was politicized during the last 10 years?
there may have implementation, not only this government, last government also, when the Supreme Court judges' houses were stormed and hooted. So you can't only take one government and say this is the only government with intimidated. So comparatively, you have to see every government is happened.
Comparatively, to take the last 20 years, do you think that the judicial process of Sri Lanka was politicized?
Yeah, there can be intimidations. There can be intimidation. I agree with that. There can be some political interference. I am not totally saying that. But you can't take the whole statement and say the whole judiciary was politicized. That's I don't agree.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pratibha Mahanamaheva. I now move on to Gehan Gunathilaka, Research Director of Verita Research. You're also an attorney at law. You're a 34-year-old, very young, dynamic lawyer, Gehan. Do you think people of Sri Lanka want reconciliation? Your time starts now.
Without a doubt, people want reconciliation. Who wouldn't want reconciliation? The question is, what are the terms of reconciliation? Are those terms majoritarian? Or are those terms terms that can be accepted by all communities? And I think it's a question of what we mean by reconciliation. And there is a tendency to pit reconciliation against justice and truth. And I think there we have a false dichotomy.
Now you say that reconciliation is important and all Sri Lankans are for reconciliation. You are also among this whole Sri Lanka or the majority, am I right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, right. The US-backed resolution, which was co-sponsored by Sri Lanka, was this a step forward as far as reconciliation is concerned?
Absolutely. And I take offense at the fact that you keep mentioning this is a US-backed resolution. This is not a US-backed resolution. It is simply
by Sri Lanka.
It is a co-sponsored resolution by Sri Lanka. It is our resolution. And the US did get involved in 2012 in initiating this process. But I would probably say that this particular resolution must be owned and was owned by the Sri Lankan government.
For the right reasons.
For the right reasons. I think every part of that text in the resolution is something that the government can be committed to and should be committed to.
If that's the case, why is the President making a statement stating that no foreign judges will be allowed when the resolution in question, the Sri Lankan sponsored resolution in question, was adopted and the Foreign Minister agreed, yes, we will have foreign judges, and now you have the Prime Minister and also the President stating very explicitly that no foreign judges will be included in the mechanism.
I mean, we're coming back to this question of foreign judges quite often, and I think it's important to know who said what. But let's ask the more fundamental question.
What is the fundamental question?
The fundamental question is, do we need foreign judges for reconciliation to really work? Now, this means that we have to analyze the reconciliation framework that within which this particular resolution emerged. This is not a resolution that emerged as a result of a negotiation merely between the government and the international community. There's another actor here, and that actor is actually quite important. Those are the victims and survivors who animated the international community. So what the international community is now insisting on is not merely driven by international agendas and geopolitics. I believe that victims and survivors have lobbied the international community for a long time. And it's not just in 2015 that we got this resolution. We got resolutions in 2012. And that resolution that we first saw in the UN Human Rights Council was a result of a lot of people from Sri Lanka going to Geneva and lobbying on behalf of the text of that resolution. So I think it's important to understand that the terms of this resolution and the terms of reconciliation is not determined merely by a government and the international community. There's a more important stakeholder here. So having said that, I think at the end of the day, reconciliation has to be accepted by the people of Sri Lanka, and it has to be accepted by the minority communities as well. Foreign judges is something that the minority communities, victims and survivors have insisted upon from the beginning. In fact, they asked for an international mechanism. So this hybrid mechanism is already a compromise. We're meeting them halfway. So I think it's important that we think of foreign judges in those terms and not get carried away with whether it is...
So you will say that the international community, including the UN, does not have any agenda?
As I said at the beginning, I think this agenda exists. All states have agendas. I mean, it's foolish to believe that they don't. But I think we need to focus on whose agenda is important. And in this context, the agenda of Sri Lankans, including victims and survivors from minority communities, has to be considered important. And they have insisted that we have international judges, international participation. This is a compromise to begin with. The hybrid model is actually a compromise, rather than something that we've gone too far with.
Thank you very much, Gihan. But before I open the floor for questions from the journalists, one more question to you. Everyone is pointing the finger at Sri Lanka, little Sri Lanka, which has approximately around 20 million people. What about the human rights violations by the United States, Britain, in Afghanistan, in Iraq? Why isn't the world talking about these human rights violations? Aren't these human rights violations? As a young lawyer, how do you view this?
No, absolutely. I mean, the atrocities committed by powerful states are something are issues that need to be taken up by the UN Human Rights Council. And I absolutely understand the geopolitics involved, the power brokering that is involved within this sort of fora. But let me ask the simple question. Should we be bothered by the fact that others enjoy impunity when it comes to our own country? I think we should hold ourselves to higher standards. And if we are serious about combating impunity, the fact that others are successful in...
Why are they bothered about us?
Well, they are bothered about us for many reasons, and one of those reasons happens to be the important one that I keep referring to. It's because victims and survivors have engaged them, and their interests obviously align with the victims and survivors.
And survivors of Iraq, Afghanistan, Palestine say we want justice?
I'm sure they do. And if you look at the discourse on atrocities committed in Afghanistan, in Iraq, you see that sort of criticism of those same countries. There are citizens in those countries that are raising the same issues. What's that?
And still they go scot-free.
I mean, I accept that there is injustice in geopolitics, but it's not a basis on which we should say that we should also go scot-free. And I think you'll agree with me if I say
open the floor for questions from our journalists. Let's start off with Sonali.
Thanks, Shyam. Dr. Dayasri, my first question is to you.
I'm not a doctor, I'm just a
Mr.
simple
Dayasri.
minister.
The incumbent government is left with doing a lot of patchwork, maybe also fulfilling promises unkept by the previous regime. Now, the Geneva Resolution has called for the repealing of the Prevention of Terrorism Act and to replace it with anti-terrorism legislation that is in line with international best practices. In your opinion, are we doing it solely under pressure from the international community and from the UN, or do you think this is the right time to do that?
I don't find the timing of any importance. It's the principle that counts. I think in this whole game plan, we should have considered it in two phases. One is the time when we had terrorism in this country. Terrorism that had led to ethnic cleansing of the Muslims, the minorities themselves were getting expert. At that time, the prime cause, what we really needed, the cure we needed was the elimination of terrorism. And we did it successfully. And that is what we are now being punished for. And as my learned friend very correctly said, well, he accepts the fact that there is no even-handedness among the UN organizations. They are fingering us more than the others. But he says that's all right. We should get into the thing first. I don't agree with that. If that is so, we must take them to task. Why is it that you are only trying to penalize us? If you are a body that there's justice and equality, take every one of them. And that is why I would answer your question by saying that we must first look after our own interest. Our interest is bringing the communities together. Victims are not the only persons who suffered. Victims are there among the Sinhalese. Victims are there among the Muslims. Victims are there among the Tamils. All victims must be looked after. The victims that the UN is interested is only the victims before whom representation has been made. In fact, I am well aware that there were so many complaints that were made against the LTT by the northern people were totally ignored by the committee that went into the matter in the UN. Completely ignored. I know this for a fact because I saw the response. There were 591 complaints. They did not touch any one of them. So there must be even-handedness. There is no even-handedness in this matter. We are being targeted, and in that sense, the present government is as correct as the previous. We have to defend ourselves first.
Gehan Gunathilaka, your organization works a lot with issues such as the Right to Information Bill. You all have done a lot of work. Also about the Prevention of Terrorism Act, do you think it's high time that we got rid of it?
The commitment that the government has made is that it would review, repeal and replace the Prevention of Terrorism Act, and that's contained in the resolution as well. I believe that the current draft or the current law that we rely on for the purpose of combating terrorism is fundamentally incompatible with international human rights standards and our own constitution. So I believe that it has to be repealed. If you ask for my personal opinion on matters of national security, I would probably disagree with a lot of what would be said on this panel. I believe that ordinary law should be used to combat offences and crimes, and we may not need a special law. But of course, I'm not a counter-terrorism expert, and there might be a need to actually deal with certain forms of crime with a special law. But having said that, the PTA in its current form is fundamentally in violation of human rights. You accept confessions as admissible evidence. When you accept confessions as admissible evidence, you are incentivizing torture. It is absolutely repugnant in terms of human rights to have this particular law, and it is not a new thing that this law has been targeted as incompatible with human rights. This particular sentiment has been there for many years. So even in the early 80s and mid 80s, people were pointing out that this law is incompatible with human rights.
But still, nothing was done.
Nothing was done. Of course, we had a war, and the political space available to reform this particular law was probably quite narrow. But now we have that space, and I think it's important that we go ahead and reform this law. And let me say one more thing. The previous government established a national human rights action plan, or formulated an action plan, and one of the action points in that action plan formulated by the previous government was that the PTA be replaced. So this is not even something that the present government has really championed. It's something that has been accepted by governments repeatedly.
Dr. Mohan, yeah.
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay. Mr. Dasari, my question is, Dr. Saranamuthu said we need a lot of discussion, a lot of persuasion to implement what we have agreed upon in the resolution. Do you see the government doing that? Because as you said, reconciliation needs to cover everyone, all stakeholders. It has to benefit all. So how do you see the government communicating this?
Yes, as I said, it's two phases. The phase one was we have to completely dismantle terrorism, which we did successfully. Stage two, phase two, is a different mindset. That is to bring national reconciliation into operation. That cannot be done by dialogue, because in Sri Lanka, the most convenient way of doing nothing is to have discussions. We've been having so many discussions. I think Dr. Mahanama very clearly explained the different discussions that were going on. Mr. Saravamuthu very clearly set out the discussions that are presently ongoing. I mean, this is merely a forum. Where are the results? We have no results available. And if the result is the resolution, then forget about it. That resolution cannot be given effect to, because none of the company laws for it have still been designed. So I think once again, let's be honest, let's be frank, let us promise what we can do, and we must promise what the people of this country needs, not what singularly a foreign minister reprimands the ambassador to Geneva, who made a very intelligent presentation. But that is why people like the Prime Minister and the President, who has a much larger representation. I mean, remember, Foreign Minister can't even win this Mathura district. He comes second to a young unknown politician who's not even made a minister, who leads the very important district of Mathura. So here is we have to be conscious. Our politicians are in fact conscious what the electorate thinks, and then that is how the entire resolution or whatever we are going to do should be fashioned. Remember, just one.
You cannot expect the Minister of Foreign Affairs of a particular country to represent the people of the country, or the electorates for that matter.
No, he does represent the foreign policy. That is my question. That's the whole discussion today about Shamir. Foreign policy, and foreign policy principle number one is the resolution before the UN committee, the UN Human Rights Committee. Now that is a very important thing. He is the principal spokesman on foreign affairs, and that is where I am blaming the foreign ministry. Foreign ministry is over politicized. There are not sufficient competent people. Certainly the ambassador to Geneva is a competent person. When he makes an enlightened speech, don't put him down. Where there is value, take maximum value of a person.
Dr. Saranamuthu, Gehan Gunathilaka made an interesting comment about ordinary law, enforcing ordinary laws. I think Mr. Govindashri, being a regular guest on this show, can also know that we put a lot of focus on law enforcement and the Attorney General's Department in particular. With regard to the Office for Missing Persons, I was reading an interesting article by Basil Fernando, the prominent jurist and human rights activist. The Office for Missing Persons, it is expected, will also deal with cases of people who not just went missing during conflict or in battle zones, but who were arrested or supposedly arrested and then later went missing. Mr. Fernando argues that they should be considered to be have been killed and their bodies disposed of. He says it is a good thing to have a database for missing persons, including those assumed to have been killed and their bodies disposed. However, the obligation of a government is primarily to investigate and prosecute murder through its criminal investigation and prosecution departments, in Sri Lanka's case the Attorney General's Department. It is good to have a database in addition, but criminal justice cannot be delegated to a database. Do you agree? Do you think that there is a lack of will among law enforcement and the Attorney General's Department to prosecute murder?
Well, until the change of regime, impunity rules supreme. Now,
does it still?
I don't think it does. But my concern here is that the steps that are taken to reverse it and to put us on a more positive footing are not being done at a fast enough pace. I think it can be done a lot quicker.
Do you think that the people who are driving it, the people who are making these changes on the in response to pressure from civil society and other sections of society, do you think that the people who have been tasked with implementing this, enforcing this, are genuine in their intention, having dealt with these people before?
I have no reason to believe otherwise, but the proof is going to be in the demonstrable action and progress that we make.
But there hasn't been demonstrable action.
Well, most certainly there has been. I mean, for example, the situation in this country in respect of reconciliation is qualitatively different to what it was under the previous regime. There have been steps taken. Return of land, for example, which has been in the media of late, never happened under the previous regime. You don't have the same degree of military involvement in civilian affairs in the north and east as you had before. We're moving towards consultations. We've got an Office of Missing Persons. We had the Padnagama Commission. The Padnagama Commission had attached to it an advisory council of international experts, and the relationship was very much like a lawyer-client relationship between those international experts and the government, where they were looking specifically at the allegations made with respect to war crimes.
I believe the question
disappearances disappeared in a way, as far as that commission
the question that Mr. Fernando is posing in his article is, should we be really relegating the task of criminal justice to an Office of the Missing Persons, which doesn't have a mandate to prosecute?
We are not relegating the task of criminal justice to an Office of Missing Persons. In fact, one of the key criticisms that has been made with regard to the Office of Missing Persons is that it will not have any kind of prosecutorial arm. So we're not relegating, prosecutions and criminal investigations to the OMP. There are other institutions, and it is tremendously important that out of this whole process, the institutions of justice, of law and order in this country are strengthened. This is not a process to undermine them.
Do you think civil society puts...
Just want to get some clarity on this. Has the Office of the Missing Persons been established already, Dr. Saranmuthu?
No, it has not.
It has not been.
The Cabinet has approved, has agreed, and it will be sent to Parliament. The legislation will be sent to Parliament.
How long will it take?
Well, that's entirely up to those who manage parliamentary business.
One last question, Dr. Saranmuthu. Do you think that civil society, yourselves included, the Centre for Policy Alternatives included, puts enough pressure on law enforcement, not the government, but law enforcement and the Aegis Department in particular, when it comes to prosecutions and criminal justice?
Well, I would say this, that, look, that we are talking about the institutions of law and order, of re-establishing the rule of law, all the civil society organizations that argued for governance over 2 decades or more can claim some credit for it. We designed and defended an agenda for governance in this country in the most inhospitable circumstances. Today everyone is for governance. Then we were alone. We have to ensure that we don't get lost in a crowd.
Mr. Dasari, can I?
Yes. Sarita, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that we would be severely punished if we don't live up to what we have promised. What are the options available for the UN to penalize us?
I think the main option they would use is the economic clout. We've seen that kind of thing happening because the kind of exchange between the IMF and the American officials at that time, like Mrs. Hillary Clinton. That is where they can hurt us most. And that is where this government can score points, because undoubtedly more than the last government, there has been certain degree of advancement in human rights and certain factors, but all that will get diminished because of this silly resolution which we have put forward, which we are unable to achieve. Now, if you look at the record, there is no even-handed treatment. There has never been, never will be. We will be singled out for hostility, which other countries don't. Maybe some people in these think tanks might not like to admit it, but the fact is that we are being singled out. We must first get equal treatment at that point. If we must point out how they neglect, how they overlook other countries. We must be on the attack rather than be on a defensive mode.
How would that help us?
Because I think the main thing is we must try and get our whatever economic benefits that can come to this country from the West, because more than from the East or from the communist bloc or from China, the West has helped us. The loans they give are at a much more reduced rate. So we must have good relationships. But if we go to spoil it by going against the resolution which we should never have initiated, if it was a US resolution as it became, it should have ended that way. We need not have unnecessarily got involved at the early stage in sponsoring the resolution. Now that is where the problem is, and my fear is, to answer your question directly, it's an economic hitman might whack us right out of the box. And that might happen not by individuals or organizations, but by powerful countries of the West.
Dr. Mahana Maheva, my final question is to you. People of Sri Lanka want to move forward from a post-conflict mentality. May 2009 saw the LTTE being militarily defeated. However, overseas there are LTTE front organizations, there's an international network which has spread to several countries. There's a section of the Tamil diaspora that is very active overseas. Do you think the government of Sri Lanka can rest easy given the challenges?
I think this government has accepted many things. Now, for example, if we have seen Tamil diaspora now ready for a dialogue. Now, they totally believe PTA abolished, and then they think all these hardcore LTT suspects are in prison, they can be released. As well as there are several reconciliation programs started. Not like last regime. Now, after the new government came into power, most of the time I have seen, even in Jaffna and other areas, there are certain intimidation for journalists, but major things has been cleared. So now the best thing, this government should start a dialogue. Even LTT diaspora, they have enormous money, unbelievable, if you can see all those things. So as other panelists said, it's a good investment for Sri Lanka, but they are still, are they deviating from that? That's why North Province, we have seen the Chief Minister has passed a resolution, Sri Lanka forces committed genocide, but it was turned down in UN Human Rights Council. So time to time they may be trying to achieve self-determination, self-administration, or finally ELAM. So that we have to compromise, because they are ready and they are ready to discuss several things, but now the peace atmosphere is there. But are we really emphasizing with reconciliation? So if you are really doing that, how many ministries are there?
But we're not going to compromise in any way another Elam war, Dr. Mahanameva, am I right? There's no compromise there.
I don't think even in Jaffna and other areas, North and East, they are ready, because they suffered a lot. They lost several things. But I like to mention one thing. Very recently I visited those areas. People complain lot of housebreaking, shoplifting, stealing cases are there, and rape cases. So sometimes they may once again request, we need police and army in these areas. It is a common thing, and it is the reality in North and East provinces.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahanameva. We're now going for a short commercial break. When we come back, it's the final round. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. Let's start off the final round with Gehan Gunathilaka. Gehan, are we genuine in our approach? Is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is the government genuine in our approach to bring about reconciliation in the country?
I believe there is sufficient intent and commitment. I can't speak for the government in terms of how genuine they are or individual actors are, but I think the proof in terms of action is that there is political will relatively higher to what it was before. So I think there is an important opportunity here, and we have to seize that opportunity, because what we have right now is a situation where the two largest parties are working together, a largely cooperative minority political party, both the TNA and the SLMC, cooperating with government. We have the JVP willing to cooperate. It's an unprecedented chapter in our history in terms of the political space available for reform. So I think even if there might not be individuals who have genuine agendas, I think the space is available and the intent broadly seems to be there. It's important that we push the government in the right direction.
If Veritas Research or you are given an opportunity to advise the government on what the way forward is, what would be the way forward for a country like Sri Lanka?
Are you asking in terms of the general way
yes,
forward, or
yes.
specific themes, disciplines? I mean, that's a bit of a
we're talking about foreign
broad
policy.
question.
We're talking about foreign policy and the US backed, which you say is not backed by the US, but which was introduced in the year 2012 by the US. co-sponsored by Sri Lanka. What would be the way forward?
I think the way forward that has been defined by this government is one that should be encouraged. So there would be large support for continuing on this trajectory. What's important is that the government makes it clear to its people that this particular resolution and this particular agenda is fully backed by the government. So I think that is where there needs to be improvement, where the government goes to the people. I think I agree with Mr. Dasari that the South has not been engaged sufficiently. The government has to go to the South and convince the South that this resolution, this entire process, this reconciliation that it speaks of is actually beneficial for all. So if it was up to me to advise the government, it would be in that respect, to really take this, own this and sell it. And that's where I think the task force and consultation process can be hugely beneficial. So the next 6 months for me is going to be absolutely vital. If there is progress, I think we're looking at a better 2017. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Gehan Gunathilaka, Research Director of Veta Research. I now move my attention to Dr. Pratibha Mahanameheva, one of the former commissioners of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. Dr. Mahanameheva, what is this government doing wrong?
This government doing wrong basically started in 2015 October. Whatever which was promised in UNHRC failed to implement. So time to time what they have done, just marking the time and appointing certain task force and commissions. So what they have done, from October they could have started certainly TRC or even hybrid court or national inquiry, a way to give a clear answer. Now still we are marking our time, because this is the popularity politics. Provincial elections are coming, municipality council. So where they also think this in a political angle. Rather than looking in a political vision to address this, immediately they may not punish us. I'll give several examples. Against Israel, there were several war crimes resolutions. What happened in New York Security Council? Veto power used by USA. So immediately we may not punished. Even there may be some countries, China or Russia, to use veto power that we can't trust. But still there is a space. What we must do at least now for the next few years. Now this government also preparing a National Human Rights Action Plan up to 2017. So we had a National Human Rights Action Plan. So rather than changing, regime change, certain good things are there. Why can't we carry it out? Why are waiting until the last moment? Now this missing persons office, because of this June session they may have established, but it has to go to Parliament and get the mandate, and other things are there. That's why even Dr. Dayan Jayatilaka really said, we have a commission report that is missing person appointed Parnagama Commission. They never marketed that in, they never disclosed that in United Nations Human Rights Council. Whatever we have done, I don't know whether it happened to the other task force also. So what they must do, as you asked the first question, genuinely, we have to start a journey. This can be started with reconciliation, and several other backup programs are there. So training given for several institutions in Sri Lanka, but we are not starting it. Are we waiting this for a popular slogan for win the elections, or are we really thinking about the country? That the government must decide finally.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pratibha Mahanameheva, for joining us this evening and for your thoughts. I now move my attention to Mr. Gomin Dasri, Senior Attorney at Law. Mr. Dasri, are we acting based on the whim and fancy of the international community and forgetting our own people? The time starts now.
It's a question that I can't say yes or no. I would rather say that both factors are there. As far as the Prime Minister is concerned, I think he is trying to win over the international community. He is giving in too much to them. He is making concessions which he is unable to achieve. On the other hand, the President has his ear to the ground. He's got the old SLFP mentality. He's still got a very parochial interest. He knows what the people in the villages seem to say. he is not going to carry out the recommendations or the resolution contents of the resolution. He is determined to do so, and he is having his way. So we have a president and a prime minister taking two conflicting points of view. But this is a government that came in with a broad spectrum of support. Even the TNA was prepared to support them. The people who didn't see proper governance was prepared to support him. The JVP was proposed to support him. But what happened? Finally, everybody is interested in putting their stake forward, disturbing the government for their own selfish political gain. Now, remember, the people are ahead of the government. Remember that when there was a last survey carried out, 94% of the people in Jaffna, notwithstanding what the TNA said, wants to learn Sinhalese. 92% of the people in the south want to learn Tamil. Now what a wonderful start. Here are the people. This is a people survey. This is what the people want. TNA says don't learn Sinhalese. The Sinhala extremists said don't learn Tamil. But the people want something more. So we have got the positives. Make use of the positives and go ahead. Stop these discussions. Implement. Get the laws into place. Go forward. Unless we do that, this country is going to stagnate. And what is worse is economically, that is the key question, economics and corruption. We have so many on display about corruption charges. How many cases are there in court?
You're saying that the president thinks like an SLF peer, the prime minister thinks like a UN peer. Why didn't any of these two parties think about the people?
Are they
thinking about the people?
Yes, they think about the people to win their votes. And in the process, they don't think of the country. They must think of the country because country comes first. It's national reconciliation. I think the only way we can establish that is with of all political parties present, candidates for every electorate, every district. And even in Jaffna, the UNP and the SLFP can win a few seats because then they don't have to rely on these appointed MPs as their cabinet ministers. People from the ground level can be made cabinet ministers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gomindashri, Senior Attorney at Law, for joining us this evening. Our final speaker of the day is Dr. Pakisha Saramuthu, Executive Director of the Center for Policy Alternatives. Dr. Saramuthu, there's a question that I need to ask you about the activities of civil society organizations. Why is that civil society organizations across the world are silent about the atrocities committed by the West? Why?
Well, as far as I know, they're not. They're not. Your complaint is probably with regard to governments rather than with regard to civil society. Anti-war movements, anti-imperialist movements have all come out of civil society. Civil society is a broad spectrum of people, the good, the bad.
Territorial integrity, sovereignty is important according to you, yes or no?
Territorial integrity
and sovereignty of nations. You had the US government SEALs, the forces, going to Pakistan and attacking a house which ultimately killed the terrorist leader Osama bin Laden. Why isn't civil society talking about territorial integrity then? Why not?
Well, that's an interesting question, because perhaps there are some people in civil society who are talking about that as a violation of the territorial integrity of Pakistan. But then on the other hand, there are those in civil society who would argue that Osama bin Laden is a terrorist leader, like Velupillai Prabhakaran was a terrorist leader. Therefore, peace, justice, reconciliation, unity, harmony in the world would best be served by dealing with an individual like that. So civil society doesn't come as one sort of homogeneous block. There are differences of opinion in terms of how to deal with questions. So there isn't a single answer. And let's be very clear, these notions of sovereignty and territorial integrity that we have were cast in 1648 after the Treaty of Westphalia. We're now 2016. It's a different world.
You have the British Prime Minister saying sorry after invading Iraq. and saying that weapons of mass destruction was never found. However, you had the president of Iraq being hanged to death. Why isn't issues like this spoken of? You had the leader of Libya being shot dead in broad daylight by NATO forces. Why isn't this being talked of?
Look, there's no point complaining about international politics. Politics is about power relationships between people who are strong, who are weak. We want to move to a world in which the power and might of the strong is combined with the consent and legitimacy that comes from the weak. We have to combine the two. There's no point complaining about the very nature and substance of international politics. It's always been about power. Politics is about power.
So you mean to say politics is all about power, power relations are taking place very rapidly across the world, so you are saying that we are the weak party here?
Well, we love to claim that we are the victims. We make a constant virtue out of victimhood and vulnerability. Because we think that by doing that, we attract a greater amount of moral support and sympathy. It's not one-dimensional.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pakis Saranmuthu, Executive Director of the Center for Policy Alternatives, for joining us this evening. Dr. Pratibha Mahanamheva, former Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka, attorney at law as well. We cleared that out in one of my questions. Also, Mr. Govind Dayashri, senior attorney at law, for joining us this evening, and also Gehan Gunathilaka, also a lawyer, the research director of Veritas Research. Thank you very much, Gehan, for joining us this evening as well. Thank you very much, Nadim. Thank you very much, Sonali. Thank you very much, Charita, for joining us this evening. Last week was quite somewhat an eye-opener for me. Why? Because when I visited most of the landslide-hit areas, people there were still waiting until their loved ones returned home. We should not forget that there is a section of Sri Lankans who also want to know what happened to their loved ones. Are they living? Are they still in camps? Or what exactly happened to them? Remember, they're all Sri Lankans. I leave you tonight, as usual, with a quote. What we choose changes us. What we love transforms us. How we create reshapes us. What we do remakes us. Remember, we have to be patriot, and we have to remember that we are all Sri Lankans, and we have to know that there is a certain section of Sri Lankans who want closure, who need to know what happened. Thank you very much for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. Next week, same time, same place. Till then, take care and good night.